Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Lorraine Salvo, Head of Financial Planning at Palisade Capital Management. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special presentation on saving for college with 529 plans.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Goldman. I'm a partner here at Palisade Capital Management, as well as our General Counsel, Chief Compliance Officer, and a parent saving for two kids to hopefully go to college one day.
So I am in my role as head of financial planning at the firm. I work with a lot of clients on various topics pertaining to their financial lives. I build customized plans, really trying to integrate all the pieces together. And aside from questions about retirement, education planning is one of the hot topics for sure. And that's why we thought it would be helpful to create this webinar for everyone tonight to, just really serve as a resource and help clarify some points, answer questions, and educate everyone on why 529s are actually quite appealing.
And I'm here, as I mentioned before, as the parent of two daughters, 10-year-old and 13-year-old, been saving for college since they were born. And I've seen the benefits of how 529 plans can really benefit parents, grandparents, and anyone who wants to help a loved one prepare for their upper education. And Lorraine is always my go-to person when I have questions. So we were a good match for tonight, Lorraine. So why don't you get us started and we can dive right in.
Sure, absolutely. I too am a parent of two college age approaching children, 14 and 11. So we are in the same boat in many cases. A couple of housekeeping items before we jump in. We have incorporated the questions that were received through the registration process into this presentation. However, feel free to submit any additional questions through the Q&A box. And we will do our best to incorporate our responses throughout the presentation, or we will speak to it at the end of the presentation. If for some reason we can't get to everything, we will reach out to you directly and make sure that your question is answered. This session will be recorded and available to view on our website on demand.
Thanks, Lorraine. So we'll start with a little bit about Palisade because not everybody on tonight's webinar is a client or familiar with us. Palisade Capital Management is located in Fort Lee, New Jersey. We've been a registered investment advisor since our formation in 1995, and we're solely focused on ensuring that our clients' families across generations have their investments well managed. As of today, we have approximately $4 billion of assets under management invested in over 1,000 private wealth management accounts. And we're very proud to be the only New Jersey-based financial advisor included on this year's CNBC Top 100 Financial Advisors in the United States. So as a second-generation woman-led and majority-owned business, our goal is to help you and your loved ones flourish. And for many families, this includes preparing to send their children to the best possible schools, including the most elite four-year private universities. But with today's cost of education, this can be very expensive and intimidating, and it requires a real informed strategy from the start. And we hope to provide some insights tonight that can assist in reducing the stress and give you a plan for saving going forward. So let's get started. Lorraine, the most basic question, tonight we're talking about 529 plans. What is a 529 plan?
Sure, Brad. So a 529 plan is basically an investment account where there are tax benefits offered so that the contributions can grow tax-free when used for qualified education expenses for the designated beneficiary. Contributions are made with after-tax dollars, so it's like a Roth IRA in that way, and the contributions grow tax-free over time. And this allows for the accounts to, depending on how much time you have to save, it can be really a tremendous benefit, just the power of compounding. And withdrawals can also be made tax-free if used for qualified education expenses for the beneficiary at eligible institutions.
So this is really powerful, Lorraine, just to play this back to you. This is a vehicle that is not capped by the income of the donor, that effectively allows a saver and a broad range of savers to donate after-tax dollars, to grow tax-free indefinitely and be utilized tax-free, withdrawn at the end tax-free if used for qualified expenses. That's a pretty unique and attractive investment proposition, and something that really should be taking advantage of.
No, absolutely. I think, in some ways they're misunderstood. I know, they're pretty widely used, but there have been some updates recently to the uses for qualified expenses. So in other words, the definition for qualified expenses has been expanded. So that's another thing that we will touch on tonight, to make sure that everyone's aware of that and how really how flexible the plans can be.
Fantastic. So, the first question that I often hear and that I considered myself when starting 529 accounts for my daughters was whether I am locked into my state's 529 plans, because, these plans are not just offered by brokers, right? They have to be sponsored by a state. Every state has them, but sometimes I hear people that say, oh, I live in New York, I have to be in the New York plan, but myself, I'm in New Jersey, and that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely. Luckily, the answer is no. So that's definitely a misconception that you have to stay in your state of residence. And really, there is a wide range in 529 plan offerings. They are definitely not created equal. Some are much better than others. So it's important to know, really look at the pros and cons. Some states, many states actually, offer some tax benefits to investing in your state of residence. But frankly, if that state's plan is not ranked highly, you may be better off going with another state's plan. So that's part of what I help clients determine, because that is, just deciding on where you land is a big piece of the decision-making process.
And Lorraine, at a high level, what are the factors that are being considered when deciding if a 529 plan is a good plan or a bad plan?
Sure. The range of investment options is a key point, Brad. There are basically a variety of investment options across the board, but each plan is different. In many cases, there are target date funds available, which basically are an assortment of funds that you can invest in that have kind of a time, almost like a clock associated with them, meaning you are investing in that fund when your child is a certain age, and the risk return profile decreases as you reach college age. So in other words, you want more growth early on, and you want more preservation of capital as you reach the point at which you will need distributions to be made. So that's a big I think, selling point too, because that's more of a set it and forget it type of an option. So the plan, the investments are essentially just recalibrating every year as the beneficiary ages and gets closer to college age. Also, there are direct investment plans. So that's really more for folks that want to pay more attention and start out aggressively, let's say, when they have, a small child or an infant, and then gradually reduce that risk profile as they age. So it's essentially the same idea as the target date fund. You're just doing it yourself. So target date funds are a little more expensive, but you're paying for that automatic resetting piece, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I know for me, I chose other state plans, 2 different plans actually, because for my 2 different kids, because the expense structures were better in those plans than they were in New Jersey, where I happen to live. So, we've talked a little bit about what a 529 plan is, and which plan you may want to consider, and that Palisade can help you choose the right one. We touched on it a little bit earlier. There's been recent changes that speak to what 529 plan assets can actually be used for. It's not just college anymore. So can you speak a little bit, Lorraine, about some of those changes and what investors may want to consider if they're going to establish and contribute to a plan for their loved ones?
Yeah, definitely. The definition of qualified educational expenses has really been expanded. It's a much more liberal definition than was in place when 529s were created, and it just creates that much more flexibility. So it includes things like you would expect, tuition and fees, books, room and board, and some other, fees associated with college, like a computer, if used for the studies associated with a degree. Also, now there is a $10,000 annual limit on qualified K through 12 withdrawals, as well as a $10,000 lifetime limit per beneficiary for student loan repayment, which is very interesting. You can also use the savings plan for registered apprenticeship programs. So if someone, if a student decides to go the route of vocational school versus kind of traditional college, you can absolutely use 529 plan assets for that purpose.
Interesting. And I know one of the other recent changes goes towards using 529 plan assets in a limited capacity to pay for private school, religious school at the K to 12 level. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. That is definitely interesting. But there are considerations that need to be vetted when thinking about that. So, as with anything, you just have to think about how much you're looking to save for a student in total, and what you think their plans are. So in other words, if let's say you're a grandparent and you want to fund your grandchild's K through 12 private education and college and graduate school, maybe it makes sense just to focus on the college piece and then beyond. And of course, there may be multiple grandchildren. So, the K through 12 piece is a nice addition to give that flexibility. It's limited to $10,000 a year, so oftentimes it's not the full cost of the K through 12 tuition. So you're still under what it would cost you be out of pocket for the rest. But it's nice to have that flexibility if that really enables a student to attend an institution that they otherwise really couldn't afford. There are some interesting nuances here with the K through 12 piece because it is a newer part of the permissible expenses for 529 funds on a federal level. So it's allowable on the federal level, but on the state level, it's case by case. So you should absolutely double check on your state to see that if it is allowable. So I actually have 529 plans through New York for my kids. And as a New York resident with a New York plan, I have a small state tax savings as a result of going that route. If I use distributions for through the 529 plans for K through 12 expenses, New York State, because they do not recognize this as an eligible expense, will basically recapture the benefits that I had previously enjoyed, and they will, those will be undone, essentially. So luckily, New Jersey, for our neighbors here, you're in good shape, but California is another one that doesn't allow it. So hopefully they will come around over time because, even though 529 plans were really created with college in mind, there are definitely, more and more uses for 529s. They're much more popular than they were years ago. And hopefully, we can solidify the use of K through 12, across the states.
Right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, Lorraine, but just to clarify, if you're using 529 assets to pay for college, the amount that you can withdraw from the 529 plan annually to pay those qualified college expenses are unlimited. So the $10,000 limit only applies when you're using them for K to 12, right?
Absolutely. That's the
right.
case.
And then secondly, whether or not you're permitted to use your 529 plan assets, for K to 12 expenses up to $10,000 a year will be based on the state in which you reside, if largely based on whether you had received a tax deduction originally from that state when you contributed to the plan.
Yes, and said another way, Brad, it's allowable, but you may get dinged on the state tax side.
Got it. Got it. Thanks, Lorraine. So, the next question that I think people think about are, okay, I'm going to open up a plan. I understand that there are real benefits here that could benefit my family. What are the different options among the plans? I know before we talked about different state plans, but even within the state plans, there are options. Can you talk a little bit about what people will have to consider once they've chosen a state plan that they think is attractive to them?
Sure. So there are two main types of plans. One is the prepaid state plan. Essentially, that allows a student to go to a college in their state, and there are some private college options within that. But you're essentially paying upfront in today's dollars for the cost of an education in that state. So from a savings perspective, it's attractive, but from a flexibility perspective, it is much less attractive because, of course, when you generally start saving for college, children are younger. They really don't know what they want to do. My 14-year-old still has no idea really. And we're getting close here. So,
Yeah.
When you have a young child, to really lock them into a specific state is a little bit, in my opinion, too limiting. I'm sure there are situations where it might make sense. But also, you're limited to that state's colleges. And, every state is not created equal. There's definitely a wide range of quality, the number of quality institutions in the different states. So,
Yeah.
So that's one option, which is less popular, as you might imagine, versus, really just the true 529 savings plan option, which is really what we've been focusing on here today, Brad. In that case, what you're doing is you're saving, as we said earlier, after tax dollars that are growing like a Roth IRA. So they're growing tax-free. Any gains associated with the account that you're earning over time are also going to be completely tax-free if the distributions are used for qualified education expenses. So it's really the only vehicle that doesn't have income limits, has flexibility. In some cases, there's state tax savings. And, as you mentioned, Brad, there are no limits on distributions as long as you have those qualified educational expenses to show. One thing I would say is to be mindful of is that investment changes can only be made twice a year, which might sound like a lot. But I remember reading an article in 2008 when obviously the wheels fell off in the market, and there was a family that had already changed their investment lineup twice, and they really wanted to go to cash and couldn't because they'd already done it twice. So they had to sit and watch the value go down. So, you are locked in that sense, and you're subject to market swings, like any investment, but you do have some flexibility in terms of what investment lineup you pick. That's something we absolutely can advise on, and just figure out what makes the most sense. Just thinking if there's anything else. I think also the other main point with 529 plans, Brad, is that anyone can contribute to them. So, in the case of your daughters or my kids, if there's a big event, there's a holiday, a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, a sweet 16, a graduation, a birthday, you can direct the guests to, as an option to contribute to their college fund. And, you create one 529 for the student, and they can receive, their gifts that way. So obviously that would be a very focused type of giving, meaning, there wouldn't really be any other way to use those funds, not for any other purpose other than education. But if that's the primary goal, it's a great option.
Yeah. I've always thought of the college savings plan as sort of like my 401k from an investments perspective. When I log on to my corporate 401k plan, I have a list of investment options, right, in a variety of different asset classes. Palisades is actually quite broad, where you can invest in stocks, bonds, commodities, target date funds. So it can be overwhelming on one hand, and Palisade is definitely there to provide assistance and guidance in making those choices. But it's also powerful because you can diversify, if that is what you choose, based on the age of the student that you're hoping to send to school later on. And coming back to the prepaid tuition plans, the other way I've always thought of it is, yes, it's attractive to lock in the tuition of a basket of schools at today's rate. But the question is, if your student is younger, perhaps the investment returns, especially because they're growing tax-free, will actually grow at a rate faster than the tuition rate would have gone up. And if that's the case, you actually could do better off while on the traditional method of investing while preserving choice. So just another thing to kind of keep in mind as you're making your elections. So Lorraine, the next huge question that I get from people, if they are skeptical about using 529 plans, is whether or not their students' financial aid eligibility could be adversely affected by saving for 529 plans. A parent might say, hey, am I actually going to be penalized for being responsible in savings as opposed to somebody else who wasn't responsible in saving for their kid, and then all of a sudden that kid gets more free money for school? I think that's a bit of a misnomer. Maybe you can provide some clarification.
Yeah, no, great question, and it definitely comes up a lot, and of course is a huge concern given the price of college tuition. Of course, and we could do a whole separate session just on this topic. I would say that there have been a lot of very positive developments in this area recently. So essentially, if you're using a 529 plan to save for college, and you are the parent or the student themselves, you will have about a 5% responsibility to use those funds as part of the expected family contribution, the EFC as they call it. You would have to list the 529 in existence if you start using it, which is another interesting feature. But interestingly, if the student has assets, so like in the case of UTMA, UGMA custodial accounts, those are counted at 20%, much higher. So 529 accounts are certainly preferable in this sense. And then something that is newer and very interesting is if a grandparent or frankly any other adult not living in the home. So for divorced families, the non-custodial parent could be an aunt, an uncle, family friend. That value of the 529 is not included at all for financial aid purposes. So this is called the grandparents loophole, even though it can apply to folks other than the grandparents themselves. These rules go into effect for the 23-24 school year, and definitely something that is interesting. And if the child does have, if there is the chance that the child has a chance of getting financial aid, this is definitely an important consideration.
Yeah. So, I guess the real misconception is that the entirety of your 529 assets are going to be used against you when considering, when applying for financial aid, but that's not the case. It's, compared to other assets that might be owned outright by the student or by the parent, it's only 5% of the parent's 529 plan assets that are being held against them for those calculations. It's as good as any option out there.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And are there limits, speaking of contributions to plan, of how much can be contributed by an individual each year into a 529 plan? Can there be, unlimited contributions since there's such attractive tax benefits in plans?
Yeah. So of course there are rules with everything, as is the case with contributions as well. So of course the cost of college tuition is growing faster than the rate of inflation, with a typical public four-year college at about 120,000, and a typical private four-year college at about $340,000 in today's dollars. So I think when you think about how much you want to save, and how much you want to contribute, part of the decision in making gifts like this and really creating this type of legacy, because frankly, that's a big part of what this is. And when I'm speaking with families, that's a big part of the motivation. Just making sure that the value of education, the fact that education is a gift, and that is a very important piece of kind of a family's fabric, right? Part of the decision is, do you want to fund every dollar? Do you want the child, or student, I should say, to have some skin in the game, so to speak, and to take out loans or contribute some amount on their own, so that they are more engaged in the process. So that's one piece to think about, because I think we make the assumption sometimes that let's just pay for every dollar, and in many cases, many families, that's not what they would like to accomplish. But 529 plans, really do offer a lot of flexibility in terms of the amount of contributions that are accepted. And it varies from state to state, but it ranges from 235,000 to 550,000 just in the contributions alone, not counting what it actually could grow to. So there are no income restrictions, as I think you mentioned earlier, Brad. So really, this is a very attractive vehicle for affluent individuals. And in 2023, as as our attendees may be aware, individuals can make annual gifts up to $17,000 a year per beneficiary. So a couple can give $34,000 together if they're filing a joint return, to any one person, and that counts for 529 plans as well. But interestingly, there is a nuance and a further advantage to using 529 plans, in that you can front load 5 years of annual gifts without touching your lifetime limit, which is $12.92 million per person right now. So it's quite high, historically high. It may not stay that way. But what's nice about this is that you're not even touching that. So you would not be able to give any additional gifts to this beneficiary for 5 years, but you could front load and really kickstart the 529 savings of for $170,000 if you have the cash flow to do that, and let that grow and compound for the beneficiary, all in 1 year potentially.
Yeah, opportunities like that for affluent individuals don't ordinarily exist, and so it's an important point to remember. I mean, the Palisade, typical client base are definitely in the high net worth category, and so knowing that even if you had the opportunity or the ability to simply write a check for full tuition when the time came as an affluent individual, pre-funding a 529 plan could still very much make sense from an estate perspective.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Completed gift for estate tax purposes. So, this money will be out of your estate, and it has to be in cash, by the way. You cannot gift appreciated securities to 529 plans, unfortunately. But those gifts are completed gifts. They're out of your estate, and then are compounding tax-free for the beneficiary if used for education expenses.
Sure. And those limits that we spoke about of $17,000 per year per beneficiary, that's, per child. So, I have two, right? So those can be multiplied for multiple kids. And it kind of leads into a question that we received in advance of the panel today, that 529 plans have lots of flexibility. I have two kids. Do I need two separate plans? Since the beneficiaries can be changed over time, why bother with two separate plans if I can just commingle all the money together? So, and we also don't know how much to save for one versus the other. Maybe one of my children wants to go to public school or not go to college at all. Another wants to go to private school and then grad school. How do I make those decisions, and how many of these plans should I be setting up in order to maintain my flexibility, but also to optimize the giving opportunities for parents and grandparents should they so choose?
Yeah, no, great questions, Brad. So the rule of thumb is that you want to save about a third of what you anticipate college costs will be. And of course, no one has the crystal ball. So, you do your best to make assumptions on what that amount might be. And I do run customized plans and projections for clients, again, making certain assumptions that we can tweak over time just to figure out what the right amount is and get as close as we can. But there are a few planning techniques that I think it's probably a good time to bring them up that speak to some of the topics you just raised in your questions, Brad. One is very important. One is that without penalty, you can shift 529 assets among beneficiaries up to the first cousin. So if you have two children, as I do, and they're not twins, meaning they're two different ages, then, I had much more saved for my son who's older than my daughter who's younger, because there was just, a longer time period for those assets to grow. So I, over time, have equalized the two accounts, taking into account the time between now and college to make it fair. You can do this over time. And it really is nice because, as you said, as time goes on and it becomes clear that one versus another, doesn't need the asset, doesn't need the account, or one needs it more, you can shift accordingly. And, frankly, I've seen clients do this, and you can equalize gifting later too. So, let's just say one child needs more 529 assets than the other, because the other gets, scholarships or something, and they just really don't need them, or they go a different path. You can then equalize the giving in another way later. You can pay a down payment for a home or something like that. So, I've seen those strategies used. So there is a lot of different ways to look at it. Also, another question is, just in terms of the 529 plan assets, and the fear of overfunding. So that is a very real fear, but it has been somewhat mitigated recently with some interesting laws. And beginning next year, up to $35,000 of 529 plan assets that are in the plan for a minimum of 15 years for a specific beneficiary can be transferred to a Roth IRA for that beneficiary, subject to the income limits each year. So in other words, the beneficiary does have to have earned income. So it'll take several years for this to actually get out of the 529, logistically, and get to the beneficiary. But, to think about having a way to really jumpstart the retirement plan, the retirement savings on an after-tax basis, right? Because this is after-tax money, and have it grow tax-free for as long as the beneficiary's lifetime, let's say, because there are no required distributions from it. Thinking about how much that can grow in a, let's say, 70 to 80 year period, pretty attractive. And, it's very difficult to kind of solve for the exact number of how much you're going to need for college. But this really helps to create a buffer and a really attractive way to do that. And I'll come back to that in a moment, because I'm guessing you might have some additional questions there. Another way in terms of helping to, solve for having funds that might not get used is you can make yourself the beneficiary. So the funds are your funds. Whoever sets up the 529 plan, that's your account. So there may be tax consequences, meaning if the distributions are not qualified educational expenses, there there may be, well, if that's the case, there will be a 10% penalty, and you will pay tax on all the capital gains of the earnings in the account, but you get back your capital that you put in. So that's another way to do things. And then you can roll the funds over to an ABLE account, which is designed for specifically for people with disabilities. And so let me stop there for a minute, Brad, and just see.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack. I mean, the recent changes are really powerful because they've totally de-risked the concept of overfunding. I think in the past, people would have said, well, I'm not as, even though there are all these fantastic tax benefits to funding a 529, I can only be so realistic in terms of how much money my loved one is actually going to spend on their education. And like you said, I might want my kid to have some skin in the game, or I'm comfortable contributing towards their undergraduate, but I think it's important that they pay for their graduate education. Now those risks have been taken away. You don't have to worry about, changing the beneficiary perhaps to a distant relative that you weren't as passionate about gifting to. And instead, you can get a Roth IRA started and really allow early retirement savings for a young person. It's extraordinarily powerful, and really can promote parents and grandparents in particular generously funding 529 plans, not only for the educational component, but because of the long-term wealth generation component.
Absolutely. And I think it makes sense just to bring up another point that you had raised, Brad, which was, just in terms of, having, let's say, 2 kids, more than one child. How do you do that? Does it make sense to open multiple 529 accounts, or can you just put it all in one and, use it out of that one as time goes on? Well, now that we have this Roth IRA benefit, you absolutely want to have a separate 529 plan for each child, because that 15-year period, you need to get that clock ticking. Excuse me. So even if you fund the 529 plan with a de minimis amount for like an infant, let that start growing, and that will then, by the end of the 15-year period, be eligible for this. So not to say you have to use it for that, and not to say it wouldn't be much later, but at least you're kind of you're shifting the benefits around and taking full advantage of of this while it's around. Interestingly, a lot of the congressmen and women love 529 plans, so they're using them, and they're becoming more popular with Americans, and it's just such a wonderful tool.
No, absolutely. I have another question that I want to share that was received in advance, but we're getting towards the end of our presentation, so if any of our viewers have questions, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and they'll pop up here. We'll do our best to answer them. And Lorraine, this question doesn't so much have to do with 529 plans in general, but just the concept of saving, especially in a higher inflationary environment. For some people, their free cash is not as free as it used to be. And the expression has been said that you can borrow for college, but you can't borrow for your retirement. As a financial planner working with clients asking these questions every day, do you subscribe to that belief, and what advice do you give?
Yes, I may have repeated that myself several times, and I don't know who originally said it, but I completely am a fan, because look, we all have competing financial priorities, and many of us are saving for college and saving for retirement at the same time, while balancing many, many other things in our lives, including aging parents and other things. So, I think it really comes down to figuring out what your priorities are, trying to force rank them, and really define them. And I think that's a lot of my role, frankly, because when I speak with clients, they may say, "Oh, I want to do it all," at first, and then we start talking about it, and then it becomes clear that they, as you said, there's not enough free cash flow to do everything they want to do right now. So where are the priorities? And can we contribute a little bit here and maybe more over here, and still, kind of hit both areas, but maybe not in the amounts that we want to. And that's why you look at it every year, and you kind of refresh a financial plan every year and you want to just see where you're at, because of course, everything changes, right? Life changes, laws change, our assumptions are changing, priorities change, et cetera. So it's really important just to have those discussions, and frankly, just kind of brainstorming on them and trying to figure out, what makes sense and what is feasible, and what is, what really do you want to accomplish? Kind of what's the minimum? But I would say that if you had to pick one or the other, I would, any day of the week, pick retirement, because it's absolutely true. And remember, you can always help kids later when you see yourself in a better financial situation and that much closer to retirement. So even if you don't have that cash flow to help them, now, let's say, many years pass, you've been contributing to your own retirement fund, and then you say, you know what, I actually can do this for them now. I can help them pay down loans, or I can, but at least you've been
even through a 529 plan, right?
Yes,
You can
that's
use
right.
some for,
Absolutely.
use some for debt, right?
That's right.
No, I mean, it's really interesting, and it also goes towards the importance of working with a planner. I know that when my wife and I met with a planner when our oldest daughter was born, each of our professional careers were at very different places than they were now, and so the priorities and the ability that we had to fund 401ks and retirement accounts as compared to 529 plans was very different, even though retirement was so much further away than college was. And now, having revisited that plan regularly with our planner, and seeing how our individual incomes have changed, those assumptions can really improve over time. They can be modified, and you can then achieve those objectives. So that's really sound advice, Lorraine. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our questions for tonight. Lorraine, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights. There's a lot of complication, especially with the new rules. Perhaps you can leave us with a few key takeaways.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely my pleasure, Brad. And I think we have some folks on the line that I've spoken with in the past as well. And, as they can attest, every situation is different, and we're here to really talk through how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what the options are, and help guide you to the best place. We run customized projections, not just for education planning, but for full financial planning, just to help our clients really understand what it is to be financially secure. And if they're not quite there, we help them get there as best we can. In terms of the college savings piece, a great resource is savingforcollege.com. I've used that over the years myself. It's got wonderful information. You can find 529 plan rankings there, and a lot of other great info. So feel free to check that out. And a recording of this presentation will be made available shortly if anyone would like to rewatch it or share it with anyone you like. Hopefully it's been a good resource. We appreciate you spending your evening with us, and we remain available for any questions you might have. Have a great night.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks, everyone, for participating. Please reach out if we can be of further assistance, and we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Have a great night.